Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So I am very, very interested in the company Bridgewater, primarily because of the book Principles, obviously. And so when I saw that you not only work there, but were in the kind of people area, this made me
Mhm.
very excited. So I'd love to just understand what your role was and then maybe a few things that you learned from working there.
Sure. Um, I'd say probably the headline thing to know for anybody in management there is that, at least during the 10 years I was there was this idea that management was a standalone craft and it could be applied in different areas. And so by design, we were moved around quite a bit, maybe most analogous to like a GE rotational program. So I actually came in the research side of the business and was COO of that department. So about 200 people. I slid over to a group called core management, which means nothing in the world. But it was effectively the group charged with like what is the sort of management scaffolding that is used by the rest of the company. And it's where was trying to establish governance for the company. It was where we were running some of the experiments on different tools like the dot collector, where you could give real-time feedback to everybody and then build a picture of people into a second tool called baseball cards. Um, and then I finished out the last 3 or 4 years was really like recruiting, talent management, executive succession, things of that nature. So I had 3 or 4 tours of duty there.
That's super interesting. So the belief was that if someone was a good manager, it doesn't really matter in which field they're managing. They should be able to manage the finance team or the HR team.
Yeah, I think where you saw it most acutely, and what's interesting is now you're seeing other companies do this, which is for the longest time, your best salesperson, your best engineer, um, eventually what you would end up doing is elevating them to management. And so taking the thing that they had become one in 10,000 at and reducing the amount of time they could spend doing that in the hopes that they could gift that, craft to somebody else. And the same was true of investors. Like the best investors in the world were now being asked to spend less time thinking about how to invest and instead spend more time developing the next generation of investors. And the thinking was, well, what if I paired those investors with someone whose craft was management? They could handle a lot of the development, a lot of the coaching, the prioritization, the accountability, the feedback. And the investor, while still having to evaluate and engage on some of the work output, could mostly stay focused on what they were supposed to be doing. And so that was the thesis behind it all.
So what were one or two things that you learned from that working experience that you've taken forward?
One or two, huh? I mean, the book has 500 principles in there. I'm not sure we can distill it down to one or two. Um, you know, I think a lot of the best lessons I learned there um, are at some ways not profound, and yet in their simplicity is why they're so important. And so one for me, like people would ask me like, what's your favorite principle? And I would say one of them is that you can have anything you want, not everything. And what I love in that is the ambition and the optimism. You can go attain anything, but the reminder that is grounded in the reality that you will have to make trade-offs. And sometimes when you aren't getting the thing you want, it's because you're not willing to make the trades to go get it. Um, or framed differently, it is like, what are you focusing sufficiently on the thing that is most important? A lot of times people will come and say like, oh, I don't have time. And you always have time. You either don't have the right priorities, so you're not choosing to spend it where you need to, or you don't have the courage to actually reorient your actions into the direction you need to go. And so like that single principle is one I go back to all the time. Like when we get distracted with our business, I'm like, well, I can have anything I want, but I can't have all this. Like I obviously I'm diffusing my energy in way too many places versus really moving down the vector that is most critical.
Yeah, I love it's almost like the finance slash investor point of view where you're always trading something, right? And so
Mhm.
yeah, like if you're not achieving a thing, then you're just not making the trades in order to achieve the thing. And so you just change what you're trading. That makes total
Yeah.
sense. And so then we progressed out of Bridgewater, and now it seems to me like you're taking the management expertise and learnings and sharing that with the world, right? And
Mhm.
so now let's dig into a few concepts that I've learned that you're passionate about in the realm of
Okay.
management and leadership. First one I heard you discussing was the difference between recruiting and hiring. Could you share more?
Yeah, maybe the easiest place to start is me thinking I was recruiting, but what I was really doing was hiring, and then why I sort of arrive at why they're different. I mean, if I go back to being a brand new manager, I had a team of 2 or 3 people. And so you think to yourself, okay, well, if someone leaves or if I get a new spot that I have to fill, I go to my HR department or my recruiting department, I put in an order. They're going to ask me for 3 or 5 bullet points describing it. They're going to post it on LinkedIn. They're going to turn around with, here are 5 qualified people. We're going to interview them, and then I'll hire the best one. And the net result of that is you get the best available at that moment in time, which, for better or worse, may well be relatively mediocre. The alternative with recruiting is not waiting until I have an order and placing it. It's imagining my world 6 to 12 months down the road and saying, well, what are the probable roles I'm going to need to fill? Do I have someone on my team who's at risk of leaving? Do I see that we're going to grow in a certain dimension and I need expertise that I don't have? So one, I'm imagining that really viscerally. Then I'm saying, well, who are the best people in the world? If I could wave a wand and money was no object and location was no object and all these other constraints, who are the 5 or 7 people I'd put in that bucket? Could I have a conversation with them? Like, could I find a way to offer them value in exchange for getting to know more about them and how they think and how they operate and the impact they can have? And in some cases, I might actually create a relationship where I could hire them to do that down the road. In a lot of cases, I can't. But what I do find is that they have friends and peers and lieutenants who look and sound and act a lot like them. And they're very happy to introduce me for the right opportunity. So now I have this list of people and I'm starting to develop and nurture relationships. Then, reality comes in that 6 or 12 month time frame. The spot is open. I have this warm list of people who I've mostly pre-vetted. They aren't available in the world, so I'm not competing with other companies for them. And now I'm getting to pick the best of the best. And my recruiting time gets shrunk. The number of people we interview is much smaller. So the same amount of effort that I like slowly dripped through via recruiting got me a much better outcome at a much lower cost. So for me, that's a hard lesson that took me probably 15 or 16 years to learn. And I can tell you the moment I saw it. The moment I saw it, and the difference was we were at Madison Square Garden. I forget if it was a concert or a sporting thing, whatever else. And a beer vendor came by. And I was there with more colleagues, including my boss. And my boss, who at the time's married, comes away with the beer vendor's phone number. And I'm like, what in the world is that about? And he looks at me and he's like, always be recruiting. And this person was just like so charismatic, so engaging. And over the next 18 months, he like nurtured this relationship with a Madison Square Garden beer vendor who then went on to become his chief of staff for like the next 7 years. Crazy.
This sounds like a great story, by the way. This sounds like the thing that I definitely should be doing. I often hear that, well, in my journey as well, I kind of just transitioned into CEO of this 70-person company after like being very in the weeds. And I'm like trying to define what the CEO does, right? And some places I read or I hear that the CEO should be spending like a big chunk, 30% of their time on recruiting, hiring. And I think this is really the way that time should be spent, I think.
Yeah, I did a lot of because I also ran recruiting. I did a lot of interviewing, and there is a book that I recently got turned on to, and um, I hadn't been paying attention to it, but it's from the folks at GH Smart, and it's goes into sort of the top grading methodology of interviewing, et cetera. And he tells a story in there of the CEO of Aon, so multi-billion-dollar consulting firm, and the CEO talks about how he expects to personally recruit 30 people into Aon every year. So he himself believes that for the health of the business, that he's got to bring in 30 people. And then he goes on to say, well, in order for me to get 30, I have about a 1 to 10 hit rate. So I need to be nurturing relationships with 10 people to get one. And so you're like, whew, so he's got a 300 person like, warm, nurturing list. And he does it in about 90 minutes a week, where he sort of pulls up the list and he's like, who have I not touched recently? What can I send them? How can, here's an article, here's a ping, just thinking about you, saw this cool thing, whatever it is. And he sort of works through the list and he makes sure that roughly once a quarter, he's making some sort of meaningful like reconnection contact with them. And he believes that it's going to take him roughly a quarter of his job to achieve the 30 people, the 300 relationships with the 30 people, et cetera. And so if that's the CEO of a company of that scale, if anything for us with our smaller, you're a 50-person company, you're a 5-person company, should we be doing it less or more? You know what I mean? Like one hire, if you have a 4-person company, you add a 5th person, it's like 20% of your company.
Do you have any strong opinions on hiring or promoting internally versus hiring externally?
Do I have any strong opinions? I don't know. I have opinions. I'm not sure if they're strong.
Let's try them.
Well, I think it depends. So I sort of tend to chafe when management gurus or people are like, always do this or always do that. And so I become a less compelling podcast guest when my answer is, well, it depends. But the reality is it depends. So as an example, I'm working with a company. They went from 0 to $20 million in annual run rate in 7 years. In year 8, they've gone from 20 million to 200 million. So they've 10x this last 12, 14 months. They went from having, when I started advising and connecting with them, they had about 500 people working for them. They now have 5,000. They think they're going to end the year over 10,000. So at some level, right, when you have that is one of the biggest hockey sticks I've had personal experience with. Promoting from within is just not even real. Like they are promoting from within like crazy and cannot keep up with the demands of the business, right? And so in that extreme context, yeah, I'm like, they are stretching people. We are developing people as fast as humanly possible, but they are going through, like, I'll talk about it, like frontline managers usually get, 2 years to 3 years experience managing a team before they're asked to manage managers. These guys are getting like 3 months, and so you're just stretching it in these extreme ways. And so you have to be injecting talent from the outside because the orders of magnitude keep transforming what the game really is. And it's not the most efficient path to try to get everybody to keep relearning the game every 3 months or every 6 months. You need to bring in that talent from the outside and try to blend those two things together. Can you bring these people in who have that experience and let them come up the curve on the culture, while the people who have been here operating that way bring that expertise on how we operate and can sort of through osmosis learn faster because they have more people in-house. So in that extreme, I'm like, you have to hire from the outside. Even in a less extreme environment, I think you constantly have to evaluate, do you have what you need for what's next, not for what's now? Right. And so if I have a leadership team and I'm working, a lot of the CEOs I work with are going through this where part of it is desire, part of it is will, and part of it can be skill. Right. So on the desire side, there's just some people who don't want to be the next level of maturity of a company. Like there's people who their identity is deeply tied to taking a company from 0 to 1, like a vague, fuzzy, non-tested market concept into a product market fit with growth. And they get there and now the rest of it seems boring. And they'd be much better served to say like, well, I'm just gonna go find another one of those. Right. And so for those, and so I think if you're managing a team, you have to sort of like work people through that reality. There's other people who would say like, I'd love to keep growing with the company, but they don't have the ability. Like they don't have the skills to do it. And again, as a leader, you're going to have to decide like, how long can I tolerate a shallower trajectory person in this critical role? Or do I need to bring in someone who's been there, done that, and needs to move through? So I don't know, I tend to take a pretty pragmatic, like high performing athletic team approach to it, which is you do have to play every day with the team you have, but I think you're constantly looking at how am I elevating that team that I have? And then are there places where if I'm given the opportunity to upgrade, I do it.
Let's switch from hiring/recruiting to meetings,
Okay.
specifically the one-on-one meeting. And I read a tweet of yours, I believe, today that I really liked. And essentially, the core message, or one of the messages, was that if you have a one-on-one with somebody, it's their meeting, not mine. And so I'd love to dig into
Yep.
that, and then any other gems you have on effective meetings.
Yeah. So I would love to say that this one was born of deep thinking and great frameworks, or maybe my MBA, but this one was actually just pragmatic. And then when I stepped into it, I never went back. So there was a reorg very early in my career. I was managing two people. In that reorganization, I inherited, instead of having two people who literally sat in my office, I had something like 18 people in 5 countries. And there were no, just based on the structure that we were inheriting and the choices they had made, there weren't like clear managers in those areas on day one. And so I literally woke up one day with 17 direct reports or 18 direct reports. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, when I had two people in my office, we didn't have to have a lot of structure. Like the one-on-ones were just turn around and talk about stuff. Like they were more formal than that. But I did the like, okay, well, I'm going to be a good manager. Like we're going to have one-on-ones with all of them. And within 2 weeks, I was overwhelmed and drowning just to have the meetings, like to do the prep for the meetings, to accommodate just literally having the time zones. And so I like declared bankruptcy like really fast. I was like, I can't possibly do this. You all know more about your businesses and your roles than I do. So how about this? These are your meetings. Here are the types of questions I'd want to know. Um, as part of that, but otherwise like use me as like a big chess piece on your board instead of thinking of yourself as a pawn on mine. Like let's flip this thing entirely. And I sort of laid out those questions. I was like, I want to make sure I know what goals you're chasing. I'd love for you to show me data about how well you're achieving those goals. If there's any qualitative milestones, wins or losses, key accounts or big mistakes, like that, definitely put that on my radar. I don't expect, if we're doing anything of ambition, I don't expect you to be problem free, but what's important to me is that you know what the problems are and you have a solution and we're on path to close those. And if you have people working for you, I need to know, like, do you have the team you need to win? If you can keep me up to if in our one-on-ones, you can answer those 6 questions. And basically operate as CEO of your area, then I'll be so much better able to support you, and we'll figure out like how to design this team to win. And so that happened, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years into my career. And it was funny because a couple of things happened. Like the best people were like, this is awesome. Like, great. Like I'm in charge. And they took full command of it. And a lot of them are the people who then ended up running those offices for me. Because I was like, oh, if you can run yourself this way, I bet you could handle a couple other direct reports as well. So they felt more empowered. I got way more leverage, right? I could sort of see what they were doing. It was their meeting, their agenda. I was now exception handling instead of having to like be the expert in every single area. So it sort of structurally knocked me out of micromanagement. Like I didn't have to know every single detail. I could go deep where things didn't make sense to me, and get into the details because that's probably the right way to do it, is go into the details that are off, and ask and coach and probe. But I didn't have to have full command and mastery of every single thing.
Yeah, I might try and steal the 6 questions, and it makes total sense that like the A players or the the best performing people would like love that, and maybe the least performing people wouldn't, which does lead nicely onto the next section, which
All
is
right.
arguably the one of the most challenging areas of running a business or being an entrepreneur, which is performance management. Any wisdom to share?
Oh man. No, no. Well, I think it depends on what you mean by performance management. So can maybe we split it a little bit? Because I think a lot of times people hear performance management and they go narrowly and think like performance reviews, like the grade you're going to give me at the end of the year that determines my bonus. I tend to think when people get performance management right, it's the bigger version where they're thinking about the alignment between what's the purpose of this team, how is that purpose represented in nearer term objectives, how are those objectives broken down into the positions we're all going to play, And then how am I going to be evaluated in playing my position? And in theory, all of that should line up beautifully so that it's not just this narrow thing at the bottom, which is like, do I get a bigger bonus at this year or not? But it's like, do the players know their position on the field to give you the outside strategy to win the game? Are we going to talk? I'll talk about this one if you want.
Yeah, let's talk about that one. It's more holistic.
I would say that maybe the thing to zoom in on, and I feel the same. We can talk about it also with expectations or delegation, because the same thing happens. Everybody wants to go fix the details on the actual like individual review process. And usually when you diagnose why reasonable people make decisions that are not fueling to the mission, it's because the top thing wasn't clear. Like either the person running the team has not clearly articulated like what is the purpose of this team, or they then haven't translated that down into, okay, our purpose is to grow sales. What is sort of the key ways that we are going to do that? And this top level stuff is unclear. We'll talk a lot about it with our the leaders we work with about expectations. And what we'll say to them is like, chances are you wouldn't even be in this class if you weren't capable of setting goals for your team, if you weren't capable of defining a metric or a milestone. So the what of expectation setting is not particularly profound, but everybody skips the how. They skip past, do you have cultural norms? Do you have budget constraints? Do you have specific time? There's all these implied things in the mind of the leader and or in the mind of the person sort of taking on the task that don't get reconciled up front and then cause a lot of heartache on the back end. And the example we use with folks is, I don't know if you're a football fan. I obviously have my Arsenal hat on today, so I'm revealing my true colors for better or worse. I know you've been very polite so far. I appreciate it. That if you watch 5-year-olds play soccer, the what is super clear, right? The what of take ball, put in that goal, prevent ball from going in your goal, right? And it is true of 5-year-olds all the way up to the Premier League. But when that's the structure of the game, 5-year-olds do what you would naturally do without any more direction, which is everyone chases the ball around in a big pack. And eventually the ball nudges in one side or maybe the other. Now you switch over, whether you're talking about Arsenal or I'll use the example of Man City, much to my chagrin, but like, you know, Pep Guardiola's system is like very clear. There's channels, there's lanes. Every player knows how many people should be in those channels and lanes at a time. There's this idea of expected goals and different positions on the field where the expected goals are highest. And so the entire game is, the entire system, the how, is designed about maximizing the number of times the ball gets into that high expected goal zone. Exact same what, right? Put ball in goal, prevent ball in goal. But with that system of how, we now know where we'll all be on the field. We'll know who should do what. We can anticipate where someone will be before they're there. We know that the process metric of getting the ball to this space is the thing that gives us the outcome that we want, which is more goals. And that usually resonates with people like, oh, and I'm like, so do you have the system as clear as Man City for your job? And almost everybody's like, no.
So we're missing the how of explaining what the purpose of the team is, or the how the team will achieve the purpose that you set for the team.
Yeah.
That's what most companies are missing. Okay. And so could you just give an example of like what the how might look? We can take as a simple example of a sales team. Like what are the examples of hows?
Sure. So you might take a sales team. So first off, I might start with, well, are we trying to focus on retention, growth of existing accounts, or new accounts? Right. So if I have a high naturally retaining thing, I probably want to focus on new accounts. If I'm rapidly churning people, then maybe the thing I really want to do is focus on retention. Like that is, so part of that alone is like, well, what's our market like, and what's the problems with our offer? What's the sort of the dynamics between the two? Where might that go? Then you might say, oh, it's on growth. Okay, well, Do we do that through cold outreach? Are we doing that by incentivizing our existing customers to make recommendations to us? Are we doing like, what are the, and again, you might say, well, look, you're handing me the goal as the head of sales, and I don't know what the answer is. Well, that's great. Then one of the hows we're going to align on is that you're going to run a series of experiments with affiliates, with cold call, with social marketing, with whatever else. And within 3 months, come back and say, like, these 3 experiments failed, these 2 experiments won, and then we're going to double down here. But it's great. Like, wow, in 2 minutes, you and I just had a conversation. I now know exactly what you're going to do. We've decided, like how you're going to do those experiments, the thresholds you're going to use, the experiments you're going to make. And great, I know what to expect, you know what to expect, and we can sort of work in mutual accountability to get there. I could, if we had just stopped before, which was, grow your territory by $10 million, you could do a bunch of things that you think are reasonable and are totally outside of what I would have thought are reasonable. And then we're going to smash into each other on the back end. If you fail, I'm going to be holding you accountable because I had this other expectation, or you decided to pursue a strategy where you were expecting a certain amount of support from me that I didn't even know I was supposed to be giving you. All of it reconciled by having a 2-minute conversation up front with way less emotion.
I want to shift now away from the management leadership stuff to your business, because you're also kind of, well, I don't know if you describe yourself as a B2B entrepreneur, but from
I'm
my
one of you.
standpoint,
Yes, I would.
perfect. And so just a couple of points. I want to understand the product suite, because it's also good for people listening, because maybe they want to join the management training you have. And then also I want to understand the role of personal brand, because I know you've been crushing both LinkedIn and X over the previous a year or so, I think. And so it'd be great to dig into product strategy and then also personal brand.
Yeah. So probably the easiest way to describe it, like at some level, we are a traditional, I guess this is like a few years old, like creator funnel, right? We have a presence on social media, which for us, like you said, is LinkedIn and Twitter. The we is the grand total of both myself and my wife. We run this business together.
Cool.
So she has a background also in management, interestingly, more on the sales side. So I did everything but sales in my career, and she did sales. And she was Goldman Sachs and Google. I was Bridgewater and Moody's. And so when we sort of got into this business of how can we help managers be better, like we were sitting on this stat of 60% of managers fail. And it was true of new managers, middle managers, and senior executives across industries, across countries. And we had been blessed with like great managers and working in companies that poured millions and millions and millions of dollars into the development of managers and leaders, and had gotten the chance to do some of that myself. And so we thought, well, if we could take the things that we had done, could we put a little dent into that 60% number? Because we know we can do more together than apart, right? If I could do it all myself, I would. Like that, honestly, the easiest team to manage is just you. But in reality, we can do so many more bigger things, ambitious things, world-changing things if we come together as a unit where 1 + 1 = 3. And so if that's true, then how can 60% of the people fail? And then a second stat hit our radar, which is equally crazy, which is 15% of managers get any training. 15%. One in 6 people get an hour of training. And you're like, that is crazy. Like, we're going to take our best people, promote them to then be in charge of other people because we want them to take on ambitious activities, and we're going to train them to do none of it. Wild. So we just thought, well, can we fill that space? So that's what we created. And so we had this social media presence. Then we had this online cohort-based course. So live training, but remote. So you can do it from anywhere in the world. And we bring together about 50 leaders every time we do it from a variety of companies. That then led to us going in-house at a bunch of companies. That then led to creating a newsletter, because being subjective to just Twitter and LinkedIn, who can turn me off at any moment in time. So now it's like Twitter and LinkedIn lead to the newsletter, which lead to the courses. And then I have a roster of 8 or so CEOs that I coach one-to-one. And that sort of has become the suite of services.
Yeah, this is the full-on like creative funnel, like top of the funnel content, like virality, driving down, get the emails, management course or training courses, and then coaching. Awesome.
Yeah.
Does your how do you split the roles and responsibilities between yourself and your wife? Do you all do everything?
No, I would say the clearest delineation, also based on our history, she very much does like the business development side. I do the writing, and then I would say I probably take 2/3 of the teaching, and she does the other third. Um, so I think I would, if you sort of thought of us as characters, um, I'm more the here's a complicated thing, let me break it down. Here's a framework. It's sort of the things you see in my writing. And then Mar very much is like the human connector. And so she comes in and is like, well, here's the story Dave should have told to make this real. And the it's funny, when we first started doing it, we sort of thought the husband-wife duo thing would be a bug. And then it turned out to be a feature that somehow the two different people who spoke the same language but see the world differently, who interact differently in the workplace, who honestly, like she had a very different experience, I think, as a woman executive, and then I did as a male executive. Like there's real power in that we at first were trying to hide, and then people were like, no, it's awesome. And then you guys pick on each other. It's so approachable and personal and authentic. And so we try to run it like a dinner party now.
Sounds absolutely awesome to have this harmonious working relationship with your wife in something that clearly both of you are very passionate about.
It's pretty special. I would say 99% of the people we talk to, when they hear, you know, we live together, we raise kids together, we work together, they sort of, their eyes get very big and they immediately say, I could not possibly do that. I love my husband or wife, but that would not happen. But we've been at it a while, so it's been pretty fun.
Where can people find you on Twitter and LinkedIn, and also the newsletter? We'll link to it below, but let's give it a shout out, please.
Sure. LinkedIn is D Kline, Klinei. LinkedIn is just Dave Kline. And our newsletter is mgmt.beehive.com. It's the management playbook. And then Management Accelerator, mgmtaccelerator.com for our leadership programs.
Amazing. They will all be linked below. Dave, thank you so much for coming on and sharing I can tell you're very passionate about the management stuff, and it really comes through. So anybody that needs this for their team, go and book a training course. Dave, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you having me.